Before we start, I request you to comment if you want a video on post-revolutionary events, in context of Russian Revolution. Now, let's get started. The powerful ideas of freedom and equality began to circulate in entire Europe after French Revolution. This circulation became intense after Paris Commune of 1871. In 1890s many factories were being set up and prominent industrial areas were St. Petersburg and Moscow. In 1896 to 1897 workers were divided on the basis of skill. Division among workers was visible in their dress. Workers formed a few associations to help their members in times of unemployment or financial hardship. Therefore, strikes took place frequently in textile industry during 1896 to 1897 and in metal industry during 1902. In 1898, Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party was founded by socialists, who follow Karl Marx's ideas. In 1902, peasants of South Russia wanted land of nobles to be given to them. Thus, they refused to pay rent and even murdered landlords. In 1904, prices of essential goods rose so quickly that real wages declined by 20%. Thus, membership of workers' associations rose in Russia. When 4 members of Assembly of Russian Workers, which had been formed in 1904, were dismissed at Putilov Iron Works. Workers in St. Petersburg went on strike demanding a reduction in the working day to 8 hours, an increase in wages and improvement in working conditions. When procession of workers led by Father Gapon reached Winter Palace, it was attacked by police and over 15,000 workers and peasants were killed and 20,000 were injured. This incident took place on the 22nd of January 1905 and is known as Bloody Sunday, that started a series of events, which came to be known as 1905 Revolution. By 1905, socialists and trade unionists formed a Labour Party in Britain and a Socialist Party in France. Lawyers, doctors, engineers and other middle-class workers established the Union of Unions and demanded a constituent assembly. During 1905 revolution, Tsar allowed creation of an elected consultative parliament or Duma, but Tsar dismissed the first Duma within 75 days and re-elected second Duma within 3 months. He did not want any questioning of his authority or any reduction in his powers. Therefore, he changed voting laws and packed Third Duma with conservative politicians. Liberals and revolutionaries were kept out. After 1905, most committees and unions were declared illegal and they worked unofficially. Severe restrictions were placed on political activities. In 1914 Tsar Nicholas II ruled Russia and its empire, that comprise current-day Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, parts of Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Central Asian states, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. The majority religion was Russian Orthodox Christianity and minorities were Catholics, Protestants, Muslims and Buddhists. In 1914, First World War broke between 2 European alliances, Germany, Austria and Turkey, against France, Britain and Russia, later, Italy and Romania. Russia army lost badly in Germany and Austria between 1914 and 1916, as a result St. Petersburg was renamed with a German name, Petrograd. Moreover, Tsarina Alexandra's German origins and poor advisors, especially a monk called Rasputin, made autocracy unpopular. By 1916, railway lines in Russia began to break down and by winter of 1916, riots at bread shops were common. On one side of Neva River was fashionable areas that contains Winter Palace, official buildings and palace where Duma meet. On the other side was factories and workers' quarters. Food shortages were deeply felt in workers' quarters. Parliamentarians were opposing Tsar's desire to dissolve the Duma. On the 22nd of February 1917, a lockout took place at a factory. On the 23rd of February 1917, workers in 50 factories called a strike in sympathy. In many factories, women led the way to strikes. This came to be called International Women's Day. Workers crossed river, Neva, and surrounded official buildings. The government imposed a curfew. Demonstrators dispersed by evening, but they came back on 24th and the 25th of February 1917. Therefore, government called out cavalry and police to guard them. On Sunday, 25 February 1917, government suspended the Duma. On 26 February 1917, demonstrators returned in force to streets of fashionable areas raising slogans about bread, wages, better houses and democracy. On 27 February 1917, police headquarters were ransacked. Government called out cavalry once again, but cavalry refused to fire on demonstrators. An officer was shot at barracks of a regiment and 3 other regiments mutinied, rebellion against authority, voting to join the striking workers. By that evening, soldiers and striking workers had gathered to form a Soviet, in palace where Duma meet and called it, Petrograd Soviet. Next day, Petrograd Soviet's delegation went to see Tsar and advised him to abdicate. Tsar followed their advice and abdicated on 2 March 1917. In April 1917, Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin returned to Russia from his exile. He opposed war. He want that war be brought to a close, land be transferred to peasants and banks be nationalized. These 3 demands were Lenin's sAprilTheses. In June 1917, 500 Soviets sent representatives to an all-Russian Congress of Soviets. As provisional government saw its powers reducing and Bolshevik influence growing, it decided to resist attempts by workers to run factories and began arresting leaders. In July 1917, demonstrations by Bolshevik were repressed. Many Bolshevik leaders had to go into hiding or flee. Encouraged by socialist revolutionaries, peasants seized land between July and September 1917. In September 1917, Lenin began discussions for an uprising against the government. Bolshevik supporters in the army, Soviet and factories were brought together. On 16 October 1917, Lenin persuaded the Petrograd Soviet and the Bolshevik Party to agree to a socialist seizure of power. A military revolutionary committee was appointed by the Soviet under Leon Trotsky to organize the seizure. The date of the event was kept a secret. The uprising began on 24 October, 1917 and p.m. Kerensky had left the city to summon troops. At dawn, military men loyal to government seized buildings of 2 Bolshevik newspapers. Pro-government troops were sent to take over telephone and telegraph offices and protect the Winter Palace. In response, the Military Revolutionary Committee ordered its supporters to seize government offices and arrest ministers. The ship Aurora shelled the Winter Palace and other vessels took over various military points. By nightfall, the city was under the committee's control and the ministers had surrendered. At a meeting of the All-Russian Congress of Soviets in Petrograd, the majority approved the Bolshevik action. As Bolsheviks were totally opposed to private property, therefore, most industries and banks were nationalized in November 1917. Land was declared social property and peasants were allowed to seize the land of nobles. Bolsheviks enforced partition of large houses according to family requirements. Bolshevik Party was renamed as Russian Communist Party. In November 1917, Bolsheviks conducted elections to Constituent Assembly, but they failed to gain majority support. In January 1917, Assembly rejected Bolshevik measures and Lenin dismissed the assembly. He thought the All-Russian Congress of Soviets was more democratic than an assembly elected in uncertain conditions. In March 1918, despite opposition, Bolsheviks signed peace treaties with Germany at Brest-Litovsk. In the following years, Bolsheviks became the only party to participate in elections to the Parliament of Russia. Therefore, Russia became a one-party state. In the Bolshevik era, trade unions were in control of the Bolshevik Party and secret police, called the Cheka First and later OGPU and NKVD, punished criticizers of Bolsheviks. The Civil War. When Bolshevik ordered land redistribution, Russian army began to break up. Soldiers, mostly peasants, want to go home for redistribution and deserted. Leaders of non-Bolshevik socialists, liberals and supporters of autocracy moved to South Russia and organized troops to fight Bolsheviks, the Reds. During 1918 and 1919, the Greens, Socialist Revolutionaries, and Whites, pro-Tsarists, controlled most of Russian Empire. They were backed by French, American, British and Japanese troops, all those forces who were worried at the growth of socialism in Russia. As these troops and the Bolsheviks fought a civil war, looting, banditry and famine became common. Supporters of private property among whites took harsh steps with peasants who had seized land. Such actions led to the loss of popular support for the non-Bolsheviks. By January 1920, the Bolsheviks controlled most of the former Russian Empire. They succeeded due to cooperation with non-Russian nationalities and Muslim jihadists. Cooperation did not work where Russian colonists themselves turned Bolshevik. In Khiva, in Central Asia, Bolshevik colonists brutally massacred local nationalists in the name of defending socialism. Partly to remedy this, most non-Russian nationalities were given political autonomy in the Soviet Union, USSR, the state that Bolsheviks created from the Russian Empire in December 1922. The Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War ended on 16 June 1923. Lenin's Red Army claimed victory and established the Soviet Union. Thanks for watching.